In an era of frontier wilderness and deep religious fear, when the untamed lands of the United States still held secrets no one could explain, a family living in the Tennessee mountains were about to encounter something ancient and deeply sinister. The year was 1817. The Bell family was a prosperous family living in Robertson County, Tennessee. They were deeply religious and respected in their community. John Bell was a businessman and landowner. John and Lucy, his wife, had children, the oldest daughter being named Betsy, who was in her mid-teen years. They were a normal, God-fearing family, but nothing could have prepared them for what was to come. It began one ordinary afternoon when John Bell was inspecting his cornfields. There, in the field, stood a creature unlike anything he had ever seen. It had the body of a large dog, but the head of a rabbit. Bell raised his musket and fired. The creature vanished without a trace. That same evening, the Bell family began hearing a strange and unsettling sound. Someone or something was beating against the outside walls of their log cabin home. Night after night, the sound returned, growing louder, growing more forceful. Each time John Bell and his sons rushed outside to find the source, they found nothing. No one. Nothing but darkness and silence. At first, the family tried to rationalize what was happening. Perhaps it was neighbors. Perhaps someone was playing pranks. But then, the banging moved inside. The sound that had once come from outside the walls were now coming from within them. And it was then that the Bell family knew something was not right. And then came the voice, a disembodied female voice that spoke directly to the Bell family. But who was she? The community had long whispered about a woman named Kate Batts, a peculiar local woman who had a troubled history with John Bell, and whom many already suspected of practicing witchcraft. When the entity was pressed for her identity, she claimed to be Kate, then immediately denied it. Yet, from that moment forward, she answered to the name Kate. And the real Kate Batts? She was still very much alive. The disturbances that followed were varied and deeply unsettling. The entity seemed to focus its malevolent attention on two members of the Bell family in particular. The patriarch, John Bell, and his young daughter, Betsy. At night, Betsy would be violently awakened, her hair pulled by invisible hands, her face slapped by an unseen force. Witnesses who were present could hear the sickening sound of each blow, yet saw nothing. Nothing except the red marks left behind on Betsy's face, the unmistakable shape of hands and fingers. John Bell himself was not spared. The entity tormented him relentlessly. He began suffering violent choking attacks, describing the sensation as a thick stick lodged sideways in his throat. Attacks that grew more frequent and more severe with every passing month. Strangely, however, Lucy Bell was treated differently. While her husband and daughter suffered, the entity spoke to Lucy with kindness. It sang hymns to her, as if whatever darkness had entered their home had a peculiar and personal vendetta against John Bell alone. Desperate and frightened, John Bell confided in his neighbor and trusted friend, James Johnston. Johnston agreed to come and spend the night at the Bell home with his wife, determined to find a rational explanation for what the family was experiencing. That night, Johnston and his wife experienced everything firsthand: the bangings, the whispers, the undeniable presence of something unseen moving through their home. At one point, Johnston leaped from his bed and cried out, "In the name of the Lord, who are you and what do you want?" Silence. No answer came, but the rest of that night passed peacefully, as if whatever lurked within those walls was listening. Johnston could not deny what he had witnessed. The phenomena were real. He urged John Bell to bring others in to observe. Word began to spread, first through the surrounding areas, then beyond Robertson County entirely. People traveled from far and wide to the Bell farm, hoping to witness for themselves the inexplicable occurrences that had tormented this God-fearing family. The Bell Witch was becoming infamous. So infamous, in fact, that word reached a man who would one day become the 7th President of the United States, Andrew Jackson. And unlike many who had heard the stories, Jackson decided he would see it for himself. Andrew Jackson and his men set out for the Bell farm. Among his party was a self-proclaimed witch hunter, a boastful man who loudly proclaimed that he would expose the truth behind the Bell Witch within a matter of days. But they never made it to the farm. As the wagon rolled closer to the Bell property, something inexplicable occurred. The wagon stopped dead in its tracks. The horses refused to move. The men climbed down and pushed with all their strength. The wheels would not turn, not even an inch. Confused and unsettled, Jackson's men removed each wheel from the axle and inspected them carefully. They found nothing wrong. Everything was intact. They replaced the wheels, and still nothing. And then they heard it. A disembodied female voice cutting through the Tennessee air like a blade. "I will see you tonight." And just like that, the horses moved. The wagon rolled forward as if nothing had ever happened. That night at the Bell house, Andrew Jackson and his party settled in after supper, waiting, watching. The witch hunter, however, could not contain himself, his boastful tales of supernatural conquests filling the room relentlessly. Jackson had grown weary of him. At one point, Jackson leaned toward the man beside him and muttered that he hoped Kate would make her appearance soon, if only to silence the insufferable braggart. He would not have to wait long. Without warning, the witch hunter lurched forward, the unmistakable sound of a slap cutting through the room, then another. The men watched in stunned silence as the self-proclaimed witch hunter was struck by invisible hands, the same invisible hands that had tormented young Betsy Bell for years. The witch hunter, who had boasted of his abilities, ran screaming into the Tennessee night, down the lane and into the darkness, never looking back. Andrew Jackson, war hero and future president of the United States, watched it all unfold and was said to have remarked, "That was better than fighting the British." As the years passed, Kate's true intentions became impossible to ignore. She was determined that Betsy Bell would never marry Joshua Gardner. Whenever the young couple went to the fields, to the river, to the nearby caves, the entity followed, taunting them relentlessly, demanding that Betsy end the engagement. Night after night, her voice filled the Bell home with the same chilling words. "Betsy Bell, Do not marry Joshua Gardner. Over and over, relentlessly, until one devastating day, Betsy removed the engagement ring from her finger and gave it back. And Kate had one more mission. John Bell had to die. On the morning of December 20th, 1820, John Bell was found dead. Beside him lay a small vial of dark, mysterious liquid. Desperate for answers, his family administered the liquid to the family cat as a test. The animal died instantly. And from somewhere within the walls of the Bell home, Kate's voice rang out one final time. I gave old Jack a big dose of that last night, which fixed him. It had been 4 years since the disturbances began. The Bell witch had finally claimed her prize. John Bell was dead. With John Bell gone and the engagement broken, Kate began to withdraw, but not before making one final promise to Betsy. She would return in 7 years. True to her word, she came back. Betsy by then had moved on. She had children of her own. When the disturbances began again, Betsy gathered her children and told them simply to ignore it. And so they did. They refused to acknowledge her, refused to engage. And slowly, Kate faded away, never to return again. But one question has haunted historians and paranormal researchers for over 2 centuries. Among Andrew Jackson's party that night was a man named Richard Powell, Betsy's former school teacher, a man who was known to dabble in the occult, a man who carried a secret obsession with young Betsy Bell. After the haunting ended, Richard Powell married Betsy Bell. Was Kate truly a supernatural entity who crossed the boundary between worlds to torment the Bell family? Or was she something far more sinister, something disturbingly human? That answer may never be known.